Okay, so Weber gives us this really terrific argument about how value rationality, this end product, this goal, this telos of valued human action, can lead to a particular ethic, particular behaviors, and an intent, which kind of produces a different way of life, but also, as he argued, a complete social transformation in capitalism. So what happens with Weber's ideas? Well, there's some good news and there's some bad news. Weber dies around 1920, and an American that actually studied with Weber by the name of Talcott Parsons realizes that sociology is growing up in the United States, but ironically, there's almost no translated works of Max Weber. There's very little familiarity with Max Weber in the United States. So Parsons, who's multilingual, begins translating and introduces Weber's work, but also his ideas to the United States. So by the 1930s, 40s, and even 50s, Talcott Parsons and Schills create a great partnership in mid-20th century sociology, where they really try and do this really broad macro work to try and grasp the fundamental nature or the basic laws of society. Now, in the next week's lecture, I'll say a little bit about how eventually by the 1960s, their work completely collapses and is really rejected by sociologists. But it's important here because they introduce some new ways of thinking about cultures as values. Now, one important point is that Parsons and Schills, and you can see this in the Schills reading we did for this week, are writing about a very modern context. So they're assuming that economics is complex. They're assuming a sort of pluralism in social life, that there'll be people of kind of different religious backgrounds, different economic incomes, different kind of interests in the world, different nationalities, that all this will occur alongside of each other in a modern country. You can think of the United States, for example. And they're also realizing that old forms of political control, so you can think of kings and dictators and monarchs and things like that, are long gone, and now we have very complex social systems where you can think of like a complex educational system of hundreds of universities like we have in this country, which is alongside a complex corporate system where we have thousands of companies of different sizes that do different things, which is alongside a complex political system where we have national, state, county level, and we have agencies and all this kind of complexity. And one of their core interest in is how does this thing hold together, right? So what holds this whole modern society thing together? And you can see from the Schills reading that Schills really focuses in on the role of authority and order. What they're concerned about overall is there a glue of authority and order that will kind of hold all this together. I got to pause for a second because I forgot the timer. Hold on. So I'm back. Sorry about that. So where Parsons and Schills go in thinking about authority and order that hold this complex system together, it's values. Now, in the first lecture for this class, I gave a metaphor, an example of one way that culture is talked about, and I'll revisit that here. For them, or this is how I argue they understood values. They look at values are both personal and public, and they operate individually and socially. There's a strong sense of that humans need guidance, and that humans need kind of guidance together by something bigger than themselves. So in their writing, and you can see this in the Schills reading, all of a sudden values start to become quite abstract. And there begin to kind of be lists of vague values about kind of like family and maybe hard work that seem to be abstracted from core processes of the society or core behaviors. Now we're going to say some next week about how do we actually discover values? How do we know that what we're looking at is that's happening in the social world, say people working long hours of work, is not due to legislation and lowered wages because of corporate profit taking, versus the fact that people really love to work hard and that's a value they have. So that's a problem that we're going to talk about a little bit next week with this approach. But here, you can see that they start to develop these kind of abstract list of what Schills at one point in his reading call secondary values. And the way values work, again, is think of a compass, or actually how about a GPS unit, right? Let's go with GPS unit. So GPS unit, like your phone, is based on the fact that there's at least 3 geosynchronous or 3 satellites operating around the Earth that at any given point, because of those 3 signals, you're able to triangulate exactly where you are. So in their system of Talcott-Parsons system, values are both the GPS unit that you're holding, i.e. this internal thing that is kind of guiding you, but they're also kind of embedded out there in these satellites that kind of keep sending signals to keep you online. So you can think of socially, it's you as an individual walking around in the world, and the values are embedded in these core systems and structures, like education system, like political authority, like an economic system. They don't really go into any process of kind of how the particular values got there, how values change, or anything like what Weber talks about, which is a beautiful argument where he traces these very particular behaviors, connects them to a very specific idea, this idea of predestined salvation from the Protestant Reformation. And in Weber's argument, he shows that values kind of have these strange effects on society. So this idea of predestined salvation creates a certain value of wanting to know what your kind of election status, whether you're right with God, and it causes this whole set of behaviors to appear, and it changes the way society and economics work. But Talcott and Parsons, a key term for them is integrative. So for them, values don't have these kind of unattended effects that are mysterious and that we can only look at afterwards, but instead values are kind of straightforward, and they integrate individuals into the social system, and they hold the social system together. So they have a kind of an authority and an order to them. I won't say too much about them here. Let me kind of leave it at that. What values, or what the idea of values was used for then at this point in American sociology, is you could do basically, this is when survey method is really discovered by the mid-20th century, is when the surveys just kind of take off, especially coming out of the University of Columbia, or Columbia University, I should say. And so all of a sudden you could ask people about, like, well, what do you value? What's important to you? Do you think people should work hard? Do you think people should like their, should family be an important part of the country? And so you could, by thinking about values and asking lots of questions about values, you could kind of get a sense of where there was agreement or consensus in a society, right? You could look at what percentage answered, yes, I think family's great, what percentage answered no, and through their eyes, you could interpret, well, how ordered is society, how integrated is society, and then they would add a further piece of it and say, well, then society's maybe not doing so well, or if the frequencies are really in agreement, society seems to be doing great. You could also use, in their argument, you could also understand deviant social behavior through values. So you could look, say for example, at somebody that's an alcoholic or homeless, and you could say, well, they're probably that way because they're not integrated well with society, and they're not integrated well with society because they're not internalizing values. They haven't been, remember this from the first lecture, socialized into those values. So Parsons and Schills really developed this elaborate explanation for everything based on complex systems at the heart of modern society, and then this GPS and satellite system of values. We'll have a lot more to say about that next week, but let me just say, as I've said before, really by the 1960s, values is off the table as a topic in sociology. Actually, that lasts really until about the last 5 years in sociology. So there'll be more about that to say next week, but just know this is kind of the high point of values analysis in sociology. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'm going to take you to today. So where are we at with using values to understand culture today? Be right back.